So I initially didn't feel that I was going to create introductions to the podcast episodes that I recorded on my own. And then I was talking to a friend just a minute ago about one of the episodes that I recorded as it happened. So it was still a very raw recording, which is the one you're about to hear. And since that recording, we have now found out what my diagnosis is, what was going on. And we also received our bill from said night in the ER. And, I could look at it in many ways. I'm going to look at it through a lens of lightheartedness in that we met our deductible to find out I wasn't having a heart attack. And that's pretty much summing up this whole episode. But it's giving yourself permission to say, I'm worth the expense, I'm worth the time, I am worth the attention, and my health matters. And giving yourself permission to ask for those things. And that's what this episode coming up is about. But I did want to preface it with the levity of it really did end up meeting our deductible just to find out that I wasn't having a heart attack. So here you go. On with the show.
Welcome to Women Mastering Midlife, where we dive deep into the rich complexities of womanhood in our middle years. I'm your host, Victoria Bird, pharmacist, certified women's health coach, and your guide on this transformative journey. Whether you're navigating perimenopause, thriving in menopause, or mastering midlife's many transitions, this is your weekly dose of expert guidance, compassionate support, and a judgment-free space to explore it all. So get cozy, hit that play button, and let's rewrite the narrative around this remarkable stage from being something to dread into a beautiful transition. So today's episode is going to be a little different. It's going to be something not on my list of topics that I wanted to cover in the first season of this episode. Something I probably wish I never would have experienced to have this memory to share with you. But I do feel that in light of the evening that transpired and in light of the importance of educating and making sure that women are advocates for their own health, I am going to tell you about my night in the emergency room. So I'm going to be 44 in July. I have a grandfather who had a massive heart attack at 46. He had an abdominal aortic aneurysm. I've had high blood pressure run in my family and family members with cholesterol issues. My blood work has always come back great. My blood pressure has always been very low. My pulse was comically low, especially I remember in pharmacy school, they would make cracks that I was practically dead, that my pulse was so low and my heart rate was so low. So I never would have thought that having pain that radiated down my left side would be a reason to be alarmed. So I had been dealing with this aching pain in my left arm. And I was just, I must have slept funny. It's no big deal. Just brushing it aside, continuing on with my day. And I was speaking to my husband about it that night at dinner, and we were talking about, I said, my left arm is just nagging and killing me. And it's radiating up my neck and into the back of my upper back by my shoulder blade, just all the way down my right arm to about my elbow. It wasn't yet going down into my fingertips. I wasn't having any tingling. It almost felt like there was a vice grabbing my tricep and just squeezing. He's like, well, what else have you been experiencing? And I started to recall, okay, so this morning when I was at May crowning, I had a little bit of chest pain, a little bit of difficulty breathing, but nothing to write home about. It was emotional. It was one of those experiences that I cried several times. So I didn't chalk it up to anything other than just being a little verklempt. And so that was in the morning. And then that evening around 4, I took my daughter to an appointment and I was sitting in a chair. When I stood up, I got so lightheaded. I was afraid that I was going to pass out. So I had to take it easy and I didn't drive right away. I sat in the car for a minute before I drove home to make sure that I was okay. And so in telling him all of this and the fact that this pain was not getting better, he said to me, Vicki, you are in your 40s. and you could be having a heart attack. And I was like, that's ridiculous. I'm healthy. I'm cardiovascularly fit. All my blood work is fine. Nonsense. And my husband, being a physician, said women present for heart attacks differently. I vision the clutching of my chest and, dropping to the ground like you see on the dramatic television shows when a man has a heart attack. And then I started to remember the articles I would read about women and cardiovascular disease and heart health, and how a lot of women don't go in and don't get checked, and they have massive heart attacks or cardiac events because they didn't take care of themselves. And so the night progressed on. We went to bed. I was like, I'll be fine. I'm just going to take an anti-inflammatory. It's probably nothing. He actually made me take an aspirin just in case. And at about 2:00 in the morning, I woke up with such massive pain in my left arm that it woke me from my sleep. And having had kidney stones and spine surgery and C-sections and all the things, I know that my pain tolerance and my threshold is pretty high. So for me to wake up from this pain, I thought something is really, really wrong. And of course, I woke up Greg and we were talking about it. And he's like, Vicki, we have two choices. You can go back to sleep or you can go to the ER. I was sitting there thinking about a trip to the ER. And the first thing I thought of was, this is going to be really expensive. The second thing I thought was, I'm going to drag my husband to the hospital, which is a place where he works and wouldn't want to spend any time when he's not on call or working in. It's going to disrupt our night. We have to tell the kids. They might get worried. I don't want to do this. And I was like, no, it's not that big of a deal. And he was not going to tell me what to do, but he definitely was leaning toward, let's just rule it out. And it's funny in hindsight, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this was men don't seem to have the same reservation that women do when they might potentially be facing a medical emergency. And I have a healthcare background. I went to pharmacy school. I know how things present. I'm studying for the Menopause Society practitioner exam, and cardiovascular health is a huge component of that. And yet I couldn't wrap my head around inconveniencing my husband, the ER doctor, the nurses, my kids, how expensive it was going to be. And that's why I wanted to talk about this today, because regardless of the knowledge I have of what could potentially happen, and the fact that I could have severe cardiac deficiency for the rest of my life, I could die. There could have been a blood clot. I could have had an aneurysm. There are so many horrible things that could be transpiring. And I'm still worried about it really not being that and wasting everyone's time. And so while this is a discussion of if you're presenting with shortness of breath, lightheadedness, nausea, pain in the left side, those are all indications that you could be having something wrong in a cardiac way. It's also a conversation of why, as women, do we feel that we need to apologize for inconveniencing people with our health? And I don't know if that stems from consistently being told I was a hypochondriac when I was younger, or, playing, I would always play hooky. Like I never wanted to go to school, especially when family would come in town. I would always, have a magical sore throat or stomach ache, not feel good. And then, by lunchtime, I was miraculously better. Maybe it's because when I was younger, I was run over on shore by my uncle with a wave runner and ran over my foot and broke some toes. And I was told it's nothing, it's not broken, don't worry about it. And I, put my foot back in a shoe and I trudged on. Maybe it's all these things from my childhood. Maybe it's the fact that as women, we constantly are apologizing for taking up space. We feel that we're a burden. We feel that we don't want to bother people with something going on with us. And I was sitting in the gown in the ER. They had done an EKG, and my pulse rate was really high, which my typical pulse rate is low. My blood pressure was elevated, but the EKG came back normal, and the blood work, we were waiting on the blood work to come back, and then they did a CT to make sure there was no aneurysm or blood vessel blockage somewhere. And when we were waiting for all this to come back, I was sitting there thinking, I don't know what's worse. The fact that I'm sitting here and could be wasting everyone's time because it could be a pinched nerve or something muscular that I just don't recognize, or that I thought, well, if I'm having a heart attack, at least this wasn't a waste of time or money. Where did we go that this is where our minds go? What can we do as women to make it okay to ask for help, to make it okay to spend the money on our health? And it shouldn't take the fear of leaving my children without a mother to take care of myself. Because there's a lot of range between fit as a fiddle and dead. I could have a stroke. I could be, impaired for the rest of my life. I could have had a heart attack that killed enough of my cardiac tissue to have restrictions on physical activity and exertion for the rest of my life. Where are we as a society that women in our generation feel like we don't want to be a burden and we don't want it to be nothing? Doesn't that say something? That I would rather it not be nothing. I would rather not be sent home saying, well, we don't know what it is, but we know what it's not. And that's great because we eliminated some really big, scary things off the table. But I still can't give you a diagnosis, and I don't know how many other tests we could run or should run at this point because we've eliminated all the bad things. I'm going to, I still have the arm pain and I haven't had a heart attack and died. So I'm assuming I probably, in my age, slept funny or laid funny in bed and ended up pinching a nerve. And it's just going to take time and anti-inflammatories and a steroid pack to get it to calm down. But it brought up a bigger issue for me than just the pain and horrible discomfort I'm still experiencing in my arm. It brought up that we need to do better for our generation of women. We need to help women become advocates for their own health. Between the medical gaslighting and the feelings of not wanting to disappoint or burden, and the feelings that our health isn't as much of a priority as it should be. And I've had conversation with other women about having to push for care. I've had conversations with women about how many doctors they've gone to seek hormone therapy for perimenopause and have been turned away at every corner, when based on what I know of their subjective information and based on what I know of their lack of contraindications for hormone therapy and the Menopause Society guidelines for hormone therapy, these women should not be denied access. But it's a lack of training and a lack of education in menopause care of physicians, some at their own fault, some at the fault of they're overwhelmed, and there's just too many standards of care to keep up with, and it's just not a priority. But then when we go to a doctor who allows us to have every test and runs every diagnostic and takes us seriously, and it turns out not to be the worst case scenario, why are we not okay with that? It's crooked. It's a crooked world right now that we live in for women in menopause health and in midlife health. So this isn't going to be an extremely long episode because I think this is opening the door for conversations that will come about having to be an advocate for your own care. But I think before we have the strength to advocate, we have to give ourselves the permission to request it. And I think that's where some of us are hung up. Some of us are caught up on the cost of what this care would be. the fear that we're burdening other people with our health, and the, oh, it's probably nothing mentality that we use and just sweep it all under the rug. I think that's where we need to start. I think we need to look at why so many women don't seek healthcare and discuss what we can do to rewrite that narrative. And then we can get into being dismissed and being mistreated. There are plenty of women who go into the emergency room presenting the same way that I did and not be left with a plethora of choices of diagnostics that they're going to run. There are women who present having an actual heart attack with the same symptoms, and they don't get the cardiac workup. I've had pharmacy school, which is 5 years of education. I had over decades of being a pharmacist. I live with a physician. We've been together for 21 years now. I know what to say in a clinical setting. I know the questions to ask. I know the tests to run. But when it comes to my own health, and they're asking me what my symptoms are, when they started, between the brain fog of not even knowing why I walked into a room half the time, and just the fear of not being able to articulate exactly what the symptoms were, just left me, gosh, I don't know. I was sitting there thinking, I don't really know how to explain this. I feel like I'm looking like I'm either lying or an idiot. And so, I had my husband in the room with me, and he did some cardiac research in med school. He was able to have a conversation with the ER doc about the cardiac workup and things that I couldn't articulate at the time. And if I didn't have that, if I didn't have my person in medicine, and I was really having a heart attack, would I have been sent home? Because I just couldn't articulate what was going on or what I was feeling. So there's a whole lot of different directions we can take this talk. We could talk about the dismissive behaviors of healthcare providers. We could talk about the fact that they're so overwhelmed and understaffed that they don't have time to sit and listen and weed through what we're saying to try to get to some understanding. But we also need to talk about patient education and self-advocacy. And I can't wait to get into those topics with you. But like I said, I think before we get into conversations about advocacy, we need to talk about giving ourselves permission. And we need to do the work internally as to why we don't feel we deserve permission to take care of our own health. And we need to work on how we can support each other to get that permission for ourselves. So one of the things I recommend to my clients, and I am a much better coach than I am a client of my own, but I recommend to keep a journal. And if it's on your phone or it's in a notebook, whatever works best for your method of keeping track, but have a journal of how you're feeling. And if we're going to swing this back to menopause care, keep track of your cycle. Keep track of your blood flow. Are you having heavier periods than normal? How does that make you feel emotionally? How does it make you feel? Are you exhausted? Do you have more energy at certain times of the month? Keep track of your moods. Are you anxious? Are you awake at 3:00 every morning? Are you seeing hair loss? Are you having joint pain? You're worried you have arthritis. Are you having brain fog? Do you walk into a room and not remember why you walked in? Can you not find your keys several times a week? Do you forget people's names or words? Like, do you get stuck trying to think of the word for something and you just can't get to it? Those are all things that we should be keeping track of so that when we do go into the doctor's office, we have that list. We don't get the word jumbling. We don't get the brain fog. We don't get the mental block when we walk into a doctor's office and we're there and they ask, how it's going. Write down the stuff that's too hard to talk about. Write about UTIs that are coming on more frequently. Write about your skin being so dry you feel like your face is going to crack. Write about a complete disappearance of your libido or vaginal dryness that makes it even uncomfortable to go to the bathroom and use toilet paper. Those are all things that you should keep track of and have somewhere so that when it comes time to have that appointment and you have your 15 minutes and you're nervous and they're rushed, you can go through it and have the idea in your mind that you have permission to talk about these things. You have permission to take up space in that room, to take up that time and talk about what's going on. And a lot of times you can't remember that 6 months ago, you woke up in a hot flash night sweat mess every night for 3 weeks when it comes time to have your appointment. So it's okay to have the time. It's okay to spend the money on your health. Because if you don't take care of your health, taking care of sickness is way more expensive. If you're afraid of being a burden on someone because you're having horrible left arm pain that's radiating up your neck and you've had some dizzy spells and shortness of breath, think of the burden you're going to be if you have a heart attack and you now need healthcare, you now need a nurse, or you now have restrictions on your mobility and your physical exercise. I hate to sound so morbid and scare you, but if you think about the burden you would be if you don't ask for permission to care for yourself now, maybe that's the jump start you need to be able to understand that you don't need to ask anyone's permission to get care for yourself. So, my life lesson from Friday night was I need to get over the guilt of asking for help and for spending the time and the energy and the money on making sure that I'm okay. Because the alternative is far worse. And, I think about when we were leaving, when I was discharged and sent home, the first thing my husband said to me was, I'm really glad we did this because we were able to just rule out the bad stuff and we can both get some sleep. He said he might get better sleep than me because I still have the arm pain, but he couldn't imagine the guilt he would feel if something happened to me and we didn't go. And the physician was so nice. He never once felt rushed or aggravated that he was taking time to do yet another test that came back fine. And the nurse was so pleasant and so kind. And if she brought me one more warming blanket, I might have hugged her because I was freezing in the ER that night. But nobody in that experience, other than myself, made me feel bad for being there. So if I can use my experience and open up and be vulnerable about the emotional aspect of what happened on Friday, and open up about the reality that regardless of my own background in education, I still emotionally and mentally couldn't wrap myself around going in and taking care of myself and ruling out bad things. If all of this can help one person listening give themselves the permission to get the healthcare that they need, then it's worth it. And I'm fully willing to share that I don't have it all together. I don't know why I still need permission, and I don't know why I still have guilt, and I don't know why I still feel like I'm just being a hypochondriac and I'm worrying over nothing, even though it wasn't anything. And that's the kicker. But in sharing this with you, from now on, I won't feel like a burden when I need to seek healthcare. I wouldn't want my daughters to feel that way. And I hope my daughters grow and feel that they could take up the space and they can ask the questions and they can go in and find out there's nothing wrong. So, wrapping up this chat, I hope that you felt something from this conversation. I hope that you agree that we need to move the needle in a different direction as far as guilt and feelings of shame and burden when it comes to caring for ourselves. And I hope this leads to more conversation. When this podcast episode is released, I will have a conversation with the ladies in my Women Mastering Midlife community on Facebook. I hope that you join the dialogue there. Leave a comment on this post if it helps you, or if you want to start a conversation from this episode. That's why I'm doing this. Not only do I want to create a legacy of wonderful conversations with amazing women, but I hope that this is a platform for change in women's health and women's feelings around their health. Have a good afternoon, and we will be chatting again soon.
Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll be back next week for another episode of Women Mastering Midlife. Until then, find us on Instagram at Women Mastering Midlife and join my free Facebook community, Women Mastering Midlife, to continue our discussions. If you have any questions that you'd like answered on an Ask Me Anything episode, send your emails to hello@missvictoriabird.com.